Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Workers' Voices. My name is Mamadou Kabasware, and I'm the Head of Communications and Publications at the ILO's Bureau for Workers' Activities. Today we are celebrating the World Day of Social Justice, and as you probably know, the ILO is the only tripartite UN agency which is devoted to promoting social justice as precondition for lasting peace, prosperity, and progress. Today we are very privileged to welcome a strong voice and veteran of the labor movement. From his native country in Finland to Geneva, Mr. Kari Tapiola served in various positions as a journalist, a trade union leader, but also as a deputy general secretary and executive director of the ILO from 1996 to 2010. After a well-deserved retirement in 2014, Kari continues to advise on key labor issues to strengthen the ILO, but also the trade unions around the world. It's really a big pleasure for me and for us to welcome you, Kari. Let me begin with a very interesting questions to you, because many people know about you, but they don't know that you started as a journalist. But my question to you will be to know, from Finland, what drew to you to the world of work and the labor movement? Why you decided to join the labor movement?
Well, I was actually, and a bit temporarily, on a political post in the foreign ministry in 1972, and then at that time there was a big merger of the Finnish trade unions, and they needed someone who could deal with international relations and who could deal with them both towards Scandinavia and Western Europe and Russia and Eastern Europe. So I found myself from one day to another working for the newly merged trade union organization, and I liked the job. I liked the kind of reality that you have in people-to-people international contacts through trade unions.
But just to remind us, what was these trade unions and what was the mission of this trade union? It was for which sector mainly?
They were two central organizations which had deep political divergences. And then they decided to merge, and then there was, in a way, a new consensus, a new reality to be built up.
But over the years, you worked a lot with many policymakers, with unions, leaders, and activists. If I can ask you one question, is there any person, like an activist or a trade union leader, who left a great impression for you?
Well, some of the trade union leaders that I would mention are actually African trade union leaders, like Jane Naidoo, who headed COSATU in South Africa, and Morgan Tsvangirai heading the unions in Zimbabwe. Of the politicians that I have seen close by, I think the biggest impression has been made on me by Martti Ahtisaari, who was the president of Finland, but who really devoted his life to mediation and got a Nobel Peace Prize for that. Then in the 1970s there was a group of European social democratic politicians like Willy Brandt, Kalevi Sorsa, Olof Palme, who really were developing, I would say, peace policies in Europe. So, you know, there were many good trade union leaders among these, and many of these good trade union leaders became politicians. But then they were not always so good after that.
Yeah. So you talk about a very large group of different people, from unions leaders, from policy makers. But if I ask you one question, what these people have in common, what could be your response to this?
The capacity they had in common, the capacity to concentrate on the essentials. And they could make common sense. They could speak in a way which made common sense to the people. They were not just preaching or making sermons or preaching liturgy, but they really related to the people.
You said that some of these unions leaders also started their career in the political arena, and you said that possibly it was not a good idea, if I understand correctly. So why you said that? And is there, from your perspective, that the labor movement must be different and not to be so close to the political parties?
Well, you see, some of them succumbed, I would say. They fell for a rather simple thing. They had been, when they were union leaders, they had been defending their unions and really fighting for their members, and also criticizing the government and fighting against the government. And some of them, when they got into government, were actually keen on seeing that their successors in the unions would not do the same thing as they had done.
Just to come back to a specific regions, let's say for Africa, for instance, we know that the labor movement played a very important role during the decolonization period, and many independentist leaders were coming from the labor movement. If I take the case of my own country in Guinea, Ahmed Sékou Touré was the first Guinean president, but he was coming from the labor movement. So what lesson we can learn from this period compared to today?
On one hand, we can learn the lesson that when political independence movements are being suppressed, and when leaders cannot really work through politics, they can work through civil society organizations and particularly trade unions. So what we learn is that there is a huge inbuilt strength in trade unions. The other problem is that then when you get to a position of power, so how do you actually translate or use that position of power so that you retain the independence and democracy that trade unions should have?
So coming back to the 70s, you attended your first ILC, the International Labour Conference, as workers delegate of Finland in 1974, which is over 50 years ago. What do you remember about this experience? And if I may, what was the atmosphere in particular at the ILO at that time, and what were the issues on the table for discussions at that period? Are they different from what we see today?
Well, I would say it was rather pure and total chaos. I participated in the Resolutions Committee, which I thought was politically one of the most important ones, but there was just an ongoing fight. And if you look at today, the topics were not all that different. Israeli occupation of the Palestinian territories, that was a very big question at the time. North-South relations in different ways, East-West conflicts, but again in a bit of a different way than later on. But many of the problems that we see today were there in a bit of a different form at the time.
Listening to you, it looks like many of the topics that you are discussing today let's say, some roots of the challenges that we are seeing today, we can understand them by looking at what we were discussing at that time. Just to understand, from this period, because there was the Cold War, what memories you have from this, in particular during the discussions here at the ILO, where we have different positions, different opinions from the West and also from the East. What was the atmosphere at that time?
Well, I would say in retrospect that the Cold War was a little bit of shadow boxing, because it formed also a kind of alliance between democratic trade unions and employers, and tripartism did not function in the same way at the Cold War time, but an underlying problem that is there, has remained there, and is very much really up now also in the question of democratization of the structure, whether the ILO is too much controlled by a smaller number of powerful countries or groups in the governing body, or whether the democratic conference has enough to say. Now, that is a very complicated topic, because labor relations do call for certain discipline, and you need to find a way of democracy which is also representative and not only, it can easily become anarchic. So the problem is still there. The problem is how to express a democratic consensus.
So when we talk about the 70s and the 80s and even early 90s, there are two figures that we are thinking about. One, it is Lech Walesa from Poland, but also Nelson Mandela from South Africa, if I may. What memories do you have about their venue at the ILO and their struggle and the ILO support for their causes here inside the ILO?
Well, I saw Mandela coming into the ILO, and I saw the reaction to that, and this was a period of liberation, and the end of the Cold War, and structural change, in a way, democratization, all went hand in hand. What worries me is that we did not have a strong enough social position to kind of insert into the political change that was taking place a kind of social dimension, or the social element that, for instance, in 1919, you had at the Paris Peace Treaty negotiations after the First World War, when the ILO was established as the social dimension of peace.
Coming back to you, Kari, looking back on your career, is there any particular memory that you cherish?
There's one particular memory which I think is very typical for the ILO. But as Deputy Director General in 1998, I was in Indonesia, and I had a meeting with the then President of Indonesia, Mr. Habibie, who had taken over after the Suharto regime had collapsed. And Habibie was looking at the ratifications of ILO conventions. And he had a list in front of him of the ratifications by Indonesia of fundamental conventions like freedom of association, child labor, forced labor, discrimination. And he looked at his labor minister and said, "Why is Indonesia not on top of the list? I want Indonesia to be best among the Asian countries." Then he looked at me and asked, "Can we do a deal? If I promise by next June, by the next International Labour Conference, that we will ratify all these conventions, so will you promise, the ILO, that you will help us to implement them, because we will need help for that?" So I said to him that, well, Mr. President, yes, we can do that on one condition, that you set up a tripartite group of government, employer, and trade union representatives to follow up the process. And that happened. And actually, this became a model of ratification in many Asian and other countries at the time.
So, in your long career, what is your proudest achievement, if I may? And if you can tell us more about any project that you worked on and that you think had a huge impact, in particular on people's life, what could be your memory from that?
Well, for me, the most important achievement, the most important one that I can think of, is the 1998 Declaration on Fundamental Principles and Rights at Work. This is the Core Labour Standards Declaration, which identified the categories, as I said, freedom of association, no child labor, no forced labor, no discrimination. But the important thing was that we did not only accept a declaration. We constructed over the next years and next decades the follow-up mechanism on how to implement these in each of the countries. So it was not only adopting the principles, but adopting the method of implementation and surveillance, where a key issue was having participation, ideally equal participation, from not only government authorities, but also the employers and the trade union organizations, in a way that brought in a new dimension to the ILO's work. And I would say that, for instance, on issues like child labor, forced labor, so technical cooperation became a major way of applying and implementing these standards. So in a way, they became reality.
You talk about this declaration 1998 and the critical importance also of the development cooperation. That brings me to the present. I just want to know, as you already published recently in 2020 a very important publications on just to show cases about the critical importance of the international labor standards, but also how the ILO set up policies to mitigate the effects of employment and social crisis. So my question to you will be to know, in this current context, what are the most pressing crises facing the world of work today, in your view?
There are crises at different levels, and I tried to explain them in that publication. Climate, everything that has to do with climate is very obviously one. It's a question of really survival. Informal economy, For me, the informal economy is a question of now either denial of regulation or the breakdown of regulation. You have also high-tech informal economies, which we are trying to find a way of how to deal with. New technology, including artificial intelligence, all these are huge questions. But I would say that the main question is that we have a growing, what I would call, dialogue gap. We have a gap in dialogue between particularly social actors and particularly in the labor market, between employers and workers and governments. We have a situation where, as the reaction to COVID, to the pandemic showed, everyone was in agreement with that you need social dialogue. And you had a lot of experience of tripartite discussions with employers, workers, and governments. But the end results were not very good. Somehow it just fizzled, seemed to fizzle out. You see, everyone seems to be for negotiations. And if you ask around, everyone is in favor of social dialogue. But then when you ask, well, yes, but what are you concretely doing to make that social dialogue possible? And where are the compromises that you are ready to carry out? So then we have a situation where we see that in practice, main actors, and I would say much of the employer community and much of the governments, they walk away from it. And they are not actually understanding what social dialogue would mean for them. So we have situations where people can perfectly well, although they in principle always say, yes, we are for freedom of association, yes, we are against discrimination, but then in their everyday work, they just walk away from it. They ignore it. And we have very little ways to stop it.
So you talk about one aspect of the work of ILO related to social dialogue and the critical importance of social dialogue as a means for actions to find solutions. But there are some preconditions, as you rightly said, to the social dialogue is definitely the question of trust and confidence, but also the goodwill to implement the outcome of this. In your view, how can we strengthen this social dialogue mechanism to make sure that at national and other levels, social dialogue will be a cornerstone for preventing but also finding solutions to different crises and others?
Well, we can strengthen it only if we can prove that social dialogue is productive in terms of dollars and cents. That social dialogue is not just something which happens somewhere in an abstract area, but that social dialogue, better cooperation at workplaces, whether it's just labor management cooperation or collective bargaining or so on, they actually improve the economy. You see, one of the things that I have never quite understood is why collective bargaining is one of the fundamental principles that is violated really quite much and ignored, although we have been moving towards more and more towards a universal market economy.
Mm-hmm.
And collective bargaining is the most compatible fundamental labor principle with the market economy. So in a way we are not, we're talking about a market economy, but we're not letting it work as a market economy. We're still thinking we're still thinking in terms of not state-owned, but private-owned somehow, but command economies, which we know have shortcomings.
So just to come back to the multilateral system, we are living today in a very challenging time, and as you can imagine, there are many attacks against the multilateral systems. And given your experience, how should the ILO and trade union respond to these challenges, and what could be their focus in your view?
Well, I would start by saying that there is refocusing that needs to be done within the ILO. Mm-hmm. And a good part of that refocusing needs to be done by the trade unions and by the workers' group of the ILO. As it was done in the 70s, the discussions that led into the question of fundamental principles and rights at work and fair globalization was started in the workers' group. Mm-hmm. The trade unions need to keep their focus on the ILO. Mm-hmm. The ILO is not only their international level of focus, but at least in principle, in each country there are tripartite bodies. There is a tripartite process. International labor standards and labor policies are discussed in a tripartite way, and there the ILO gives really the best guidance for the workers. See, the workers' group and the trade unions remain the driving force of the ILO. The governments, in their international relations, they have many other avenues. You have all kinds of other organizations and so on where governments push for their interests. Mm-hmm. The employers, the business, they have many ways of influencing, not only through labor issues. For the workers, they have the ILO. This is what they have. And the ILO is their agenda. And they should fully focus on that. And that means also that others should accept that the labor agenda is unique and that the workers have a very special say in it.
You mentioned really about the critical importance for unions to strengthen and to focus their policies around the ILO. One question that I have for you is in relation to the question of membership of the trade unions, in particular at national level. In your view, how and what could be the best strategies to strengthen the labor movement by attracting new people and retaining their membership, in particular in this context where it's really challenging for many workers' organizations around the globe?
Well, there are two ways for a trade union to strengthen its attraction. One of them, of course, is to get more members, and this is what unions should do. High levels of union organization are important as a basis, but they're not everything. I have felt that somewhere between 15 and 25% of union membership in a country is quite good for representation, quite realistic. Because there's no other. There are no other organizations that are speaking on behalf of the workers. But then, in addition to making sure that people understand what specific benefits they get from being union members, and also developing those benefits so that they are interesting for people, the unions have to have a relevant program. They are public actors. They have to be participating in the public discussion, and they have to make absolutely sure that they are recognized as the spokespersons, as those who speak on behalf of the workers. Even in countries where the actual percentage of union membership may be low, you have usually situations where nobody else speaks on behalf of the workers. This is the place that the workers should occupy, take, and make use of.
Two important and urgent issues affecting the world of work are definitely the question of artificial intelligence and climate change, as you said. How can the ILO and its constituents may respond to these global issues?
Artificial intelligence everybody speaks about it. To me, it's a little bit question with all technology, including artificial intelligence, that what comes out depends on what is being put in. And information technology has always been a question of this, garbage in, garbage out. Mm-hmm. If the social concerns, question of social justice, and aspects that are important for social justice are absent from programming, then they will be absent from the outcome. So it's at that stage that we need to make sure of the principles on which we are working. Otherwise, we are just trying to correct something where the train has left the station already. So we need to influence not only the outcomes but the whole purpose of artificial intelligence. The other issue of climate change, I'm not going to go into a long discussion on climate change, but I'm just looking at the recent populist discussion, and I'm afraid that we will not survive if trade unions and workers are in the resistance camp to sometimes even rather radical climate measures. I can understand that people react when climate policies increase their costs and when they are not given alternatives, but they should be, instead of being against those changes, they should rather say, all right, but please give us the alternatives.
Yeah.
And let us have a say on those alternatives.
Importantly, you said about the alternatives, but as you know, like many organizations, trade unions are living in a very difficult and challenging times. If someone asks you a question about why these organizations, in your view, are still relevant today, and why, as a young workers, I need to join the labor movement, what could be your response to him?
My response would be, who else represents your interests? If you think that you will survive alone throughout your life in this system, and that you need no collective support, fine. But in most cases, it will not take you very far. You, a human being, a worker, is part of a society, and he or she needs the society, and the society needs him or her. But they have to frame their work so that they can fulfill their individual desires, but in a way that they are part of a community, and that they get the benefits of being part of that that community. And it's the community interest. The community interest for the individual is something that we very often forget.
You talk about this dilemma between the individual interest and the community interest. And one part of the discussions is also in relation to the critical importance of solidarity, even among the trade union movement. And also the question of the benefit that unions can give. If I ask you one question, so what type of benefit for the young generation today who are seeking for a job, who are seeking for new ways of working, what type of benefit unions should think about in terms of attracting these new people, including the two underrepresented groups? I'm talking about the women, but also the young workers. What could be your advice on this?
Well, I would say that if you are a young person and you're starting to look for your future work, or where you get so you can browse websites and see what kind of possibilities there are. If we have proper, realistic, interactive trade union websites who can help, who can actually give you answers, and who have different ways of supporting you, who can propose different ways of supporting you. So then there is a whole area for unions to work on. You see, I've never understood, when we talk about this new technology and all the issues with new technology, that for instance, modern management, for about 20-30 years now, it has been essentially conditioned by computerizing and by computer programs and so on. And any company has a program for its international work, its sales, its purchasing, and whatever. What is there in this new technology that would stop you from bringing in a collective bargaining program, a program for the company to bargain and deal with its workforce. It's a question of making use of the technology and making creative use of it.
So, coming back to you, Kari, and it's really interesting to have this conversation with you. Can you draw parallels with your own stories, the struggles you observe, and the ways to lead them? Because if you look at the current context, it's really a challenging and a high sense of uncertainty, and people really need some hope. If you look at your own career, what could be your takeaway from that?
Well, I can't really draw a parallel, except I would draw a lesson, which is that you always need to have an alternative. You need to have an alternative ready. In 1978, I was thrown in the middle of a debate where the trade unions, in particular the American trade unions, wanted to promote tripartism in the OECD. And there was a strong resistance on sides of the governments and the OECD, the industrialized countries, secretariat, and then we were discussing the ways of having a stronger trade union input, short of tripartism, which we all realize that we don't have the resources for. So when we wanted to have more influence, the alternative was consultations. Find ways of being heard. Make your stand known, but then don't overreach yourself. Another debate that we had in the late 70s was on multinational enterprises at the time. We've had many debates on them, but we had a debate on multinational collective bargaining. It was collective bargaining between multinational enterprises and their personnel in different countries. And we realized very soon that that was not feasible. Sounded like a good idea. It was not feasible because it would have cut across and actually destroyed national bargaining systems. But then we developed an alternative, which was information and consultation arrangements between management and the labor force. And those have in multinationals, and those have in one form or another being continued. So, you always have to see what is feasible, because life is mostly plan B. You really very rarely achieve your plan A in life, but it's the ways of getting to a decent plan B.
To quote you, Kari, about life is a question of plan B. This is very powerful because, as you know, in this context of very uncertainty due to skepticism and geopolitical tensions. So if I resume, or in your view, how can we avoid this skepticism, and why people should continue to believe in the ILO and social justice?
Because we have no alternative. if we don't believe in the ILO, if we don't believe in social justice. So what do we believe in? Now, in the long run, we all agree, I would say, that social justice is the only sustainable alternative. The problem with the long run is that, as John Maynard Keynes said, in the long run we're all dead. So how do we shorten the long run? I think that's the question that we should ask ourselves, and I can't see any other way than just demonstrate that you can negotiate, and negotiations give results, even if they are small. You see, the main thing is you don't give up. The first director of the ILO, in one of his last reports to the International Labour Conference in the early 30s, so he reminded of the antique Greek tale of Sisyphus, whom the Greek gods had made push a boulder up a hill only for it to tumble down again. But even Albert Thomas didn't see an alternative. He basically said, you just have to pick yourself up and start all over again and continue doing it.
Kari, today is the 20th of February, and this is the World Day of Social Justice. What does this day mean for workers and their organization?
Well, it is the day when the workers and their organizations can say that, well, look, now we are talking about what belongs to us. So the workers should really expropriate and make use of this day, because this is the real alternative. We should make sure that we have different examples to show that this is not only liturgy, that this is not only talk, but that there really is a substantive, there's really substance in it, in whichever way you do it. But you can go on the streets, you can make speeches, you can repeat things, you can just say that, well, look, remember, this is why we are doing that, but don't forget it. It is not, social justice is not liturgy. It is a reality that we have to work towards.
We are arriving at the end of this conversation, Kari, and let's imagine that there is a young worker from Helsinki or from Dakar or from Santiago who is watching these conversations. What is your final message to this new generation?
Well, as I've said earlier, don't give up. Don't give up, and make a proper analysis of your own current and longer-term interests. And really don't look at yourself alone in the world, but look at yourself in the society. And look at how your own work and the society, what the society does, how they should strengthen one another and not be in conflict with one another.
Thank you very much, Kari, for this insightful conversation. To our audiences, just to remind you that our guest today was Kari Tapiola. Kari Tapiola is a very strong and credible voice of the labor movement, but also the former Deputy Director General of the ILO. We talk about your experience, but also your insight for the labor movement, but very importantly, your visions for the future. Thank you again, Kari, for this opportunity, and to those who are watching this video or listening us via the podcast, please stay connected for a new episode of the Workers' Voices. Thank you very much and see you soon.